Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bart, and today I'm going to talk about a topic that usually I would not cover because I'm mostly interested in politics or science. But I think it's okay to talk of this topic in a different channel. That's the easier one, the less impactful, the less serious channel. And so the point is the discussion about racial features in DnD. This is going to be a long video, so be prepared, yes. And I have a schedule to follow for this video, so I will follow it. So if you see me looking at the PC, it's because of this. And well, let's start to talk about the discussion about racism and racial features and what has to be done about it, and we'll also dig into optimization. Let's start by reading two definitions. And these two definitions are stereotype and archetype. Okay, so what's a stereotype? A stereotype is a set idea that people have about what someone or something is like, especially an idea that is wrong. So a stereotype, it's overall a negative word, because the idea mostly is wrong in a stereotype. This is not necessarily the case, but we'll go into that in a while. Let's read what an archetype is. A typical example of something, or the original model of something from which others are copied. Now, we can see that an archetype is overall neutral or even good as a concept. So, why these two words are needed? Well, their stereotype especially is needed to talk about racism. But in general, we also need archetype because we are dealing with fantasy. We are dealing with imagination. You see, an archetype is probably, or mostly, a concept that is linked to what you imagine. While a stereotype is usually, not always, related to something that is real. Although, if it's a stereotype, it's probably false. What are good examples? I'll go into the Japanese anime culture. And so, what an archetype of a shonen protagonist is probably Goku. And what a stereotype of a shonen protagonist is a character that has features of Goku, but it's not Goku. So we can see that a stereotype is a typical thing, and an archetype is also a typical thing, but it in its purest state, if we can say so. Why are we talking about this? We are talking about this because we need to differentiate between the two. There are of course real stereotypes, but well, they are not needed. But real stereotypes are usually the racist ones, that are of course wrong, because all humans belong to the same species. That's Homo sapiens actually, and there is no real difference on average between every human. Of course, there can be a genius, but a genius can or a physical champion, but these exceptions are spread all over the world, and they do not specifically belong to a certain ethnicity or group of people, and that's why the stereotype is wrong, essentially, because it's stating something false. But we'll also go into talking about differences, but we'll go to that later. Let me open again the schedule. Okay, so what's the deal? Well, let's talk about D&D again and about fantasy. Well, let's talk about an archetype actually. The most famous one probably It's the archetype of dragons. Dragons are concepts of our imagination, and I won't go too deep into their description, their origin, but essentially they are born from two archetypes. The Eastern dragon, that's the Japanese, Chinese, and so on. Also, someone can connect it to Quetzalcoatl and other deities of the South American culture. And the Western dragon, that's mostly European, and it's the winged beast that usually spits fire, mostly in fantasy. And those two archetypes are one good and one evil. From them, we have in D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, we have the chromatic dragons that are from the bad European dragon, and the good ones that are from the Eastern, the good metallic ones that are from the Eastern archetype. Now you see, what's the deal with dragons? There is actually no deal, because they are usually not playable by people. So it's not a problem if they have, if they are stereotypical, because you see, they start from an archetype and they become stereotypes. Although not that much stereotypical, because they are well explained, well analyzed, and so on. They have different qualities, different quirks, different abilities. That's what dragons are in D&D. But they come from an archetype, and that's not a problem. What can be a problem instead is something that comes from stereotype. But so far, we are not seeing it yet. Why am I saying so? Because after dragons, we're going to talk about orcs. Now, before going into orcs, we need to talk a bit about other stuff. You see, humans are all the same, are all equal, but other races that are fictional are not humans. Since they are not humans, they do not belong to the same species. They can be different from humans. The ability scores can represent this difference, and that's fair. That is a fair thing. An ability score is nothing different than a physical feature, but it's expressed through numbers. Another physical feature can be the wings of an Aarakocra. Let's talk about evolution for a moment. See, there are different species of cats, big cats especially. We have the lions that evolved to be better at, that are more resilient than other hunters, and they evolved to catch the prey, to hunt the prey on open field, using their mantle to camouflage with the savanna landscape. Cheetah evolved in the same environment, but they are not on the resilient side, but they are the fast ones, and also they catch smaller prey, possibly. Then, more we go into the jungle, more we see animals that are more evolved to hunt in the jungle. The tiger is a good in-between. It's in India we have jungles, but we have also open fields, and the tiger is suited for this. Also, its mantle is better to camouflage with the colors and the grass. And then we have the spotted mantles that are the leopard in Africa and Asia, and the jaguar in South America, that are especially adapted to hunt in the jungle. The black leopard, or panthera, I don't know if in English it's called panthera. Panthera, of course, it's the Latin genus anyway, but is just a variation of both the leopard and the jaguar, and well, we can have the melanistic one everywhere, actually. And then we have other big cats like the snow leopard that's evolved to be better in the mountains, and the cougar, I think it's called, or mountain lion, although the mountain lion could be also the extinct lion, an extinct lion, but anyway, let's call it the cougar. That's a good in between mountains and open fields, for example, and in general, all-terrain vehicle, how can we call it? And so we can see how all of them are big cats, big medium cats, and because the specific scientific distinguish between big cats and not big cats, it's not in the dimension themselves, but actually into their ability to roar and other features that I will not dig into, and I'm not an expert to do so it's better to not to do it. But we can see that among the big cats there are different species that are suited and evolved different features to accomplish different tasks. It's not that they evolved to do so, they were able to do so, and then they occupied some niches, but I'll not go into theory of evolution, okay? It's just to give the meaning. We're talking about physical differences. What about mental ones? Now we are talking about human brain evolution. We had different species of humans, of the genus Homo, and they evolved their brain, of course, up until the Homo sapiens, that's our species. It's shown that Homo sapiens did not evolve further the brain, not that much anyway, in thousands of years. So in this time span, we had Egyptians, we had barbarians, we had prehistoric humans, we had the barbarians in Europe and Asia, we had the Mongols, we had the Native Americans, and all of them show that the brain has more or less stayed didn't change. The brain more or less didn't change. We are all in the same species, after all. It makes sense. So we can see that in the civilization, in the human civilization, the brain didn't really change that much. Why do I bring this up? Well, I bring this up because we have to make a distinction between what's physical and what's mental in Dungeons and Dragons. In Dungeons and Dragons, we have 6 ability scores. We have to discuss, we have to divide between physical and mental ability scores. We have the dexterity, the strength, and the constitution that are, of course, physical. And then we have charisma and intelligence that are, of course, mental, and wisdom that may be in between, but for the sake of simplicity, we'll say that wisdom is also a mental ability score. What I'm saying is that different races that in D&D are actually most likely species and not races should give different physical ability scores, but they may not give different mental ability scores. We'll go into this later. So for now, let's talk about what's an ethnicity. Well, an ethnicity is actually what the whole discussion is about. An ethnicity is the mixture of traditions, uses, folklore, tales, ways of beliefs, rituals, ceremonies, values, even some physical but not biological features like clothing, for example, can be part of an ethnicity. The problem is that ethnicity and races are mixed in Dungeons and Dragons. It's mostly made for simplicity purposes, but it's not the only reason. You remember I talked about archetypes and stereotypes? Well, let's talk about orcs. You see, orcs, yes, they are stereotypical, but they are stereotypical for a reason. They have been in the folklore of mankind for quite a while, but what really set them as a staple in the fantasy are most likely the Tolkien books, especially The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Now they present the archetype of the orc, the ogre, the orc. They show how savage and violent they are, thanks to Tolkien artwork. And we shall not deny the influence that his work had on mankind. It's the same with elves, but let's stay on orcs for now. So you see, Tolkien set an archetype of orcs. And yes, I'm talking about orcs, although in the manual it's the half orc, but for me it's the same thing. I'm talking about orcs because it's about orcs, okay? Let's not talk about half orcs, they are just orcs to me, okay? Like elves are not half elves, they are different, and the one in the manual should be the orc because there are the elves, but I digress. Just remember that what I'm saying with orcs, it's mostly the same with half orcs, okay? And so we have some powerful, strong, resilient beings that in the Tolkien books are savage, primordial, violent, and all these kind of features. And these two things are ethnics and a race mixed together. But the point is that's fixed in our imagination. Now D&D takes from that. So it's fine if orcs are by default violent. But it's stereotypical. I can agree that's stereotypical. To be fair, in my campaign, they're not like this. There is a story behind a civilization of orcs and other stuff, but it's a long story and we are not really interested into that. So the savage orc comes from an archetype, but it's stereotypical. It's okay to fix it, but I don't think it's wrong to present it in a stereotypical way, because it has solid basics. After all, we are not having any problem with dragons being stereotypical, because they are not playable, and that's why there is the difference. An example of a non-stereotypical orc may be Gul'dan from World of Warcraft. It's interesting. It retains the features of orcs. I'm not really a fan of how orcs are portrayed in World of Warcraft, but for the sake of discussion, it's a good example. And it still is an orc in all the senses of the orc idea, but it's not stereotypical by any means. And also we can see more honorable orcs and this concept of honor in fighting. So what about orcs? Well, we can take orcs and we can talk about their ethnics, and we can see how their behavior, after all, their ethnicity can be considered a mixture of barbarians, Vikings that are different from barbarians, Native Americans, and indigenous people of Australia, and other, of course. So this love for conquest, it's mostly a Viking thing, and or barbarian thing. This also savagery, same thing. But also their tribal vision of their community, and the culture about spirits and primordial gods. And we of course shall not forget the prehistoric humans, the humans that hunted mammoths, for example. All of this, why? Because we can see that mentally orcs are not different than some humans. Therefore, speaking about Dungeons and Dragons mechanically, they should not have less mental features than humans, but they can have different physical features than humans, and that's the overall idea. And now we'll talk also about elves. Elves have this, or dwarves. They have the same physical measures than humans, more or less. Both orcs, yes, that are elf orcs, elves, and dwarves, but they are a different build. It's fair to me that dwarves or orcs are stronger than humans, and elves are more agile. Elves should weigh most likely half than a human, and while retaining the same body shape and the dimensions, so they probably have a similar muscular structure, and so it makes sense that they are more agile because they have to move less weight, while orcs are usually stronger built, bigger, and so they can have more strength, and dwarves are stockier but bulkier, and there are cases in nature, for example some bears, where even a smaller bear, a bear that is smaller than a human is stronger than it, okay? And it may weigh more because it's packed, it's concentrated, so it's fine also that dwarves are more resilient, stronger, and we can talk about this in any way, and I'm just giving examples to show that physically we can have differences, because they're not the same species after all, they're different species, and like I said with the big cats and medium cats, we have different species of cats that can do different things physically. But when we went into the mental features, we can see that more or less they are all the same for now, because we'll go into magic really soon, and because we can compare to humans most likely every aspect of ethnics. We can find some ethnicity to fit into, and we can see that mentally there is no difference. So humanoid races that are species in D&D, to me, are absolutely okay to have different ability scores increases than humans, but only if they are physical. Let's talk about mental ones now. One moment, I have to... Okay. What about magic? Now, magic is a bit different. It can change the structure of the mind, for example. So I can be way more okay with inherently magical races that are species to have different mental mental ability scores increases. It's fine. For example, a firbolg is a race, but it's a species, a race, but also an ethnicity that are strongly connected between each other. Okay, firbolgs, all firbolgs have the connection with the nature because it's a magical connection, and at least in D&D it looks it's like this. Therefore, it's okay to have mental ability score increases. So we should just distinguish between cases. Let's just take a bit more detailed look at elves to finish the discussion, because elves more or less magical? I think that they are more magical than orcs or dwarves. They are more linked to magic, so it's okay, half okay if they take ability score increases to mental stats. But the problem is that sub-races are a thing, and sub-races are okay. They can be the same as subspecies. It's totally fine. It happens in the world. It's okay. Again, if we talk about tigers, for example, there are different subspecies of tigers, and they are smaller heavier, bulkier, bigger, it's okay. Adapt to different environments, more to jungle, more to colder environment, for example, it's okay. But we also have to put into this the magic when we are talking about races, sub-races in D&D. So it's okay that elves have different ability scores for different sub-races, because they show how magic interacts with them. The problem comes into the description of some of them, because it mixes again ethnicity and race, and that's the whole problem. So that should change it, but only the description. The rest is totally fine to have different physical or mental features that are connected to magic. There is not a racism problem here, but there is one last problem that we have to talk about, and that's optimization. It has come up with the discussion, following the discussion, the fact that some races are better to do some classes than others, and that's a bit unfun, because if you take that race because you want to take that race, then you probably will be less optimal with your class, and it's unfun. For example, if I play an orc, that's an half orc, but I'll call him an orc, and I want to play it like a warlock or a wizard, we have a problem here, because I will fall short, fall behind. Also, I can use ability score increases from racial ability. How are they called? The ability score increases that come from picking a race can be used to reach better modifiers to the stats, and therefore I can understand this problem. And also the fact that you have to choose between feats if they are available to you by the dungeon master, and the ability score increases means that if you want to fill the gap because you are behind because you picked a suboptimal race, then you have to renounce to feats, but maybe you want to play a war mage because it's cool, it fits your idea of an orc. So what's the deal? Well, my idea is more or less this one. You get mostly physical ability score increases from races or sub-races, and then you get a background ability score increase and you divide the backgrounds into two parts: the ethnical background and the personal one. The personal is not changed, the ethnical or it does, and we can have freedom between these ones. We can also call the ethnical background part of the normal one, the personal one. It's just up to the developers, it's just a suggestion. And then the main point is that from your background you get an ability score increase. And it can be a mental one, most likely. You will pick the mental one from this one, although if it's an elf you may have an innate connection with magic, so it's fine if you get an increase into your charisma, wisdom or intelligence. It's totally fine. Again, as long as we don't mix ethnics and races, everything is fine. And it's more about the presentation of the race than anything else, actually, because anything else is most likely good or half good. It can be optimized a bit better. And so how do we end everything here? Well, I think that orcs are fine. They are a bit stereotypical, so we can change the description of them, but we do not change what ability score increases or features they give, because they are fine, they make sense. We can also talk about the ethnicity of elves sub-races, because they can change. Then we put something linked to how the character has evolved. For example, if you have been living in the woods, even if you are not class that has a +1 in wisdom, you a race that has not a +1 in wisdom, you get it from your background because you have been living in the woods. Makes sense, okay? But after all, it's up to it's already fine how it is, because you discuss with your dungeon master, and it's totally fine to change something. It works, but it's okay to rework this system in probably a different edition. I don't think it's a good idea to patch it. I think it's better to rework it, because you can end up, you should and could end up having more ability score increases from race. That's an okay thing. And I also think that feats and ability scores should not be connected, or should be less connected. I think that overall the ability scores should have less impact on the game. Maybe the CR of enemies can increase up to 30. So what's 25 now? No, what's to 35? So a Tarask should become a 35 CR creature, and everything scales up to that, while the ability score system does not really change. So you still get +1 to the modifier if your ability score is 12, and so on. Okay, that's fine, but you get more ability scores in the beginning, so you have more flexibility. You can optimize less, you can have more fun, you can have better mental ability scores, because they most likely come from your background. So we are good, and I think that this can be a good way to solve the problem without doing not unnecessary changes that I think they are not needed. Well, that's all, folks. I don't plan to do other videos, but I wanted to do this one, and so that's it. Goodbye.